Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live on a Thursday afternoon. Today is October 31st. Happy Halloween and certainly scary days for any New York Yankees fans out there, as last night the Los Angeles Dodgers locked up a 2024 World Series win. Huge moment for the Dodgers, obviously. Won recently in 2020, and yet something about it does feel a little bit hollow. Call it the no championship parade. I think for a lot of MLB fans, it's more so about the 60-game season and the format and the playoffs that year. Certainly was a strange one. So it felt like the Dodgers certainly needed another ring out of this run of being one of the top contenders, probably consistently the top contender in the MLB for years now. So they locked down a 2024 World Series win with what was a thrilling Game 5. So we're going to be breaking down the game itself and then sort of diving into the big picture takeaways from this series. So we're going to be diving into that. Then we are going to be moving on to the NFL, where we are going to be looking at the upcoming Thursday night football game that is set to take place tonight between the Houston Texans and the New York Jets. The Jets coming off of a brutal loss last week to a divisional opponent in the New England Patriots, a team that is one of the worst in the league. So as for the Jets, they are certainly trying to get themselves back on track with this one. We'll talk about that game and the makings of it. I will then be doing my top 10 in the NFL headed into Week 9 and previewing my top 5 best bets for this upcoming weekend. So we have a whole lot to dive into today. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, or you can use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube to be able to leave a comment that pops up on screen for everyone to see. All you have to do is leave a tip or donation. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. Last night, we got an absolute thriller out of the Los Angeles Dodgers versus the New York Yankees, as we saw the Dodgers come back from a 5-0 deficit to be able to secure the win and secure the World Series title. So we are going to be diving into the specifics of the game first, and then going to be sort of taking a broader scope view at what all of this means. So like I mentioned, Dodgers coming back down 5-0, and usually we try and stay on the optimistic side of things and, ultimately give the Dodgers their credit, of course, but the New York Yankees really could not have scripted out a better first 4 innings to this game, where the offense started hot. We saw them starting to build up some momentum in their Game 4 win. They came out immediately in the first inning, back-to-back home runs from Aaron Judge and Jazz Chisholm Jr. The Judge won with Soto on base, so that's 3-0 from the gates there. And then they home run in each of the next 2 innings as well to be able to build up an early 5-0 lead. And that is sort of enter Garrett Cole right there, where the whole conversation of hypothetically how could the Yankees come back down 3-0, it's getting a big offensive game for a bullpen day. For the Dodgers, they did so on Tuesday, and then last night it was having Garrett Cole be the man that can slam the door for you. And that's what we were getting early on in this game. Garrett Cole was unhittable. 0 hits allowed through the first 4 innings. Enter the 5th inning, which will go on to go down in infamy for the Yankees and for baseball in general, where this Yankees team, we've talked about it before, doing some of the small things. The defense, the base running has come to hurt them at times, and defense definitely was the killer for the Yankees in this game, where 3 unforced errors in the bottom of the 5th, or in the top of the 5th, to try and make this thing close. You just cannot spot teams extra 3 outs in a single inning, and ultimately it did end up getting to Garrett Cole. It started early on in the inning. Aaron Judge dropping what should have been a pretty easy pop out to center field that allowed Kike Hernandez to reach, get runners on first and second. There's a ground ball to Anthony Volpe at shortstop, who just doesn't square up, is unable to make the throw to third base, and that goes down as an error as well. Loads the bases. Garrett Cole then, I believe he strikes out the next 2 batters to, strikes out Gavin Lux and Shohei Ohtani to make it to 2 outs. Just get out of this, and instead, we see him, and, it's a little bit up for debate as to how much is on the shoulders of Garrett Cole in this instance, but ground ball to first base for Anthony Rizzo, and just a miscommunication. He thought Cole was going to cover first base. Cole assumed that Rizzo had it on himself. It wasn't exactly a hard hit ball to him. Ultimately, mistakes on both ends, and the Mookie Betts is able to reach technically on an infield single, so it doesn't technically go down as 3 errors, but just a massive mistake from the Yankees defensively, and then the Dodgers capitalized from there. It was Freddie Freeman, of course, because who else would it be? He hits a 2 RBI single, followed up by Teoscar Hernandez hitting a 2 RBI double, and just like that, we have a tie game. And I think it's important to mention as well that the Yankees offense starting hot was extra important for the Dodgers, because at that point, we've seen to some degree Dave Roberts be a little bit more, pick his spots in terms of when to use the premier bullpen arms, and probably felt like either way with what would have been a scheduled off day anyways today, that he would have rolled deep with his bullpen. But that game could have gone out of hand quick, and because they were able to get to Jack Flaherty so early on there, Flaherty couldn't make it out of the second inning. It really thinned out what the Dodgers could use from a bullpen arm perspective, considering that this was their 3rd game in 3 days, and just on Tuesday, we saw them go with a bullpen day. So, arms were very tired, options were very limited for them. It felt like, again, the Yankees let this opportunity just absolutely slip away all in one inning. Now, the game didn't end there, of course. That just made it a tie game. The Yankees were able to get back up on top in the 6th inning, as I believe it was Giancarlo Stanton who ends up hitting a sacrifice fly. But then after that takes place in the 6th inning. Huge kudos to Blake Trinan of the LA Dodgers, one of the premier high leverage guys that they have in their bullpen, and he was asked to do a lot in this game. He comes in the 6th inning, gets them out of the jam there, then pitches the next 2 innings, including getting out of a little bit of a jam in the 8th inning, and he absolutely held it down. They needed a little bit more bulk from him at that point in the game. There were only 4 relievers left remaining available, and they were the 4 that all pitched in Game 4 and threw a number of pitches with Kasparius, Hudson, Knack, and Honeywell. And Trinan said, "Don't worry about it. We're good." He goes 7 outs, 2 1/3 inning. He allows 1 hit and 1 walk in that 8th inning, again, to make things a little bit dramatic there, but ultimately he was excellent. And in that same 8th inning as well, it was the Dodgers who were able to get ahead in this one, where just an absolutely brutal appearance from Tommy Canley, who ended up loading the bases without recording a single out. Yankees bring in Luke Weaver to try and weather the storm. Ultimately, it's 2 sac flies. Again, the Dodgers just being better around the margins, doing the little things. You could tell by their appearances that they were just trying to put the ball in play, hit it deep. You look at Mookie Betts immediately. He gets a fastball high. He knows he's just going to send it to the outfield, score a run, huge win, and the 2 sac flies are able to put the Dodgers back on top 7-6, and that is where it would stay. Treinen hands it off to Walker Buehler. Buehler shuts it down for the 9th inning, and that's all she wrote for the 2024 World Series. Now, obviously, a lot of different angles to come at with this. We'll start here with the Yankees, and then sort of we're going to go a little bit more in depth into the praise of the Dodgers here. But again, there is a lot of blame to go around here. You know, a lot of people are going to point the finger in different directions. Is this on Boone, Judge, Cole? It's a little bit of all of the above. I think that the reality of the situation is the better team just straight up won in this series. And, it's tough to be too upset, I suppose, with this type of a performance when already the odds were so stacked against you. This series wasn't won and lost. I mean, technically it was won and lost in Game 5, but it goes back to the fact that they just started far too slow in this series, and it's something that kind of don't love doing cross-sports comparisons, but just this past year in the NBA Finals, Nick Wright of Fox Sports, he had a tweet that has gone down in a little bit of infamy now at this point, where specifically he was talking about Celtics versus Mavericks championship series, and he said, quote, "By the time the Celtics adjust to playing real playoff baseball, the Mavs are going to be up 3-1. And that obviously did not age well. The Celtics sort of steamrolled through, built up a 3-0 lead. It was really on the Mavericks side of that where they weren't ready, but that's kind of what I felt like with the Yankees in this series, where they were not exactly battle-tested throughout their run in the American League, and that's not by any means to take away what they did. They had an easier run. That doesn't mean that they had an objectively easy run, but I think that if you asked any Yankees fan coming into the season, the 2 teams you have to beat in the playoffs are the Royals and the Guardians. How do you feel? They would feel excellent. And this isn't just revisionist history. I mean, we talked about it at the time that when the Astros and the Orioles were eliminated in the first round, in the wild card round, that it was basically the Yankees American League to lose, and that ended up being the case. And they were pretty easily able to sort of cruise through those 2 rounds, and they were doing so very much on the shoulders of the pitching staff, which even through the World Series here as well, I would say was pretty excellent for them. They're between the starting performances that they got and the really exceptional performance from the bullpen. Specifically, you're looking at guys like Luke Weaver and Clay Holmes and Tim Hill, that the 3 of them were able to really hold it down for the Yankees, and that's why some of these lower scoring affairs they were able to win, where it was just about timely hitting from Juan Soto and from Giancarlo Stanton. Now, Aaron Judge, I don't think is really in that same conversation, obviously with the postseason he had, but that's kind of my whole point here, is by the time that the Yankees actually got acclimated to a real challenge, we saw that bottom of the lineup really stepping up for them in Game 4 and in parts of this Game 5 as well, that, and Aaron Judge as well, that, excuse me, that they weren't able to keep up. They were already sort of behind the 8 ball already by the time they arrived at Game 4. And I think that the version of the Yankees that we saw these last 2 games was very impressive, but I mean, just a total heartbreaker, as Kenneth in the chat here says, worst loss I've ever experienced as a sports fan. Kenneth here, our local GSMC football podcast host, and he is also a Yankees fan part-time there. So absolutely brutal for the Yankees. I don't really want to bury them here too much because I do want to give praise to the Dodgers. So I want to do that and just talk some big picture takeaways from this series. But before we do so, we are going to have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Getting my way in to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. The stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing our coverage here with the Los Angeles Dodgers winning the 2024 World Series. And we just talked specifics from the game itself, but I want to look a little bit more big picture here as well with both of these teams and sort of how all of this played out. Obviously, congratulations to the Los Angeles Dodgers. Kind of took too much time for me to get there. I mean, this was just really a dominant season to a lot of degrees. They had the best record in the MLB. They were able to, I wouldn't say cruise through the playoffs. Like, they were backs against the wall in that in the Padres series in the NLDS. Being down in the series 3-1, being able to win both games with their backs against the wall and come back in that one. Pretty dominant performance against the Mets, all things considered. I know it went 6 games, but ultimately the Dodgers sort of controlled that entire series. And then in this one as well, Yankees make things interesting late, but the Dodgers were just the better team. And that's the reality of the situation, is they were the best team in the MLB this season, and you have to give them their props for that. Freddie Freeman being awarded the World Series MVP for pretty obvious reasons. Home runs in each of the first 4 games in this series. Broke the record for the most consecutive World Series games with a home run going back to 2021 as well. And with those home runs, that includes what will probably be the most remembered moment of this World Series, in my opinion. Maybe the 5th inning of this past game can take some precedent there, but the walk-off grand slam in Game 1, I mean, that was the premier moment, I think, of the MLB season as a whole. So Freddie Freeman, very much deserved. He did not have a home run last night in Game 5, but he still had his fingerprints on it. Drove in 2 runs during that 5th inning rally. Finished the series with 4 home runs, 12 RBIs, and Freddie Freeman was already a very likely Hall of Famer, and he's just able to take it home and take this World Series MVP, and sort of make it a no-doubter up to this point. Got to feel great for him with everything that's going on in his personal life as well, that he's been very open about. I mean, what a roller coaster of a year for him. And right now, at least from a baseball perspective, because of course some things in life, as he would definitely tell you, are bigger than baseball. But, storybook ending here for him as for this season. We wish him all the best of luck moving forward. But, it's the big three in LA right now. It's Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani, and Mookie Betts. They all come home champions in this one. Mookie winning his third ring. Shohei Ohtani winning his first. Now, obviously, this was not his best showing for a playoff run as a whole. The dislocated shoulder definitely plays a part of that. Realistically, we weren't seeing him play his A ball anyways. He was very good, though, in that Mets series in the NLCS, and that's something to, take into consideration. 8 hits, 6 RBIs, 9 walks. I mean, he was reaching base over 50% of the time, and I do think that it is, just him being there, his presence. And this stems to even in the World Series where he wasn't hitting his best, but even just the presence of Shohei Ohtani is enough to worry opposing pitchers. And even after that dislocated shoulder injury, I think he came back in Game 4 it was, and drew a couple walks as well. So, I mean, again, I understand it's not quite as storybook necessarily as Ohtani would have preferred it. The reality of the situation, though, is my bet that Ohtani is going to get a handful of more opportunities and shots at the postseason throughout the rest of this decade as he's on this monstrous contract, and he is going to have his moments going forward. That I'm not worried about Shohei whatsoever in terms of kind of a reputation from a postseason performer perspective. I mean, we've seen much worse postseasons. We saw one with one of the other best players in the world, the other, best player in the world in Aaron Judge this postseason as well. Ohtani's going to get his cracks at the postseason once again. So it was a fun introduction. Obviously came out with a bang in his first game in the playoffs. Ultimately, not quite the numbers you would have hoped from him, but still so glad that he is an MLB champion, because again, we have seen so much greatness for him up to this point in his career. For the critics that are out there, this idea that he hasn't won a ring and he won't. Well, not to say that, again, he was the reason why they won the World Series this year, but he was dominant in the regular season, first ever 50-50 season. He's a huge part of the reason why they were the best record in the MLB, had the 1 seed in the National League, and just having that much extra firepower. Again, early on, we saw the Dodgers last year as well sort of get out to this slow start early on when they played the Diamondbacks, and Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts, both of them were struggling. That was the case really for the Dodgers this year as well, as Freddie was dealing with that ankle injury. Mookie Betts was dealing with a slump early on in that Padres series as well, that Ohtani just being there to do marginal things for them. And, marginal for him is having a couple home runs in that series. But overall, the legacy of Shohei is going to continue on, and I'm so glad for him, for him to be able to secure a ring as well in all of this. And as much as, it is in large part due to those big three future Hall of Famers that were incredible as a whole throughout this postseason. Again, each one of them sort of having their own individual moments popping up. It kind of overshadows the fact that, especially with the Dodgers, with all of the talent that they have, with how much money they spend, this was a very unconventional style of pitching to get the job done for them. Having Jack Flaherty be the Game 1 starter, your playoff ace in a sense, and finishing the playoffs with an ERA over 7, very hit or miss in his starts ultimately throughout the postseason. the fact that he wasn't able to, like we mentioned, the script went perfectly through the first 4 innings for the Yankees to be able to win Game 5, with Flaherty giving you so little in a moment where the Dodgers really could have benefited from having some length from a starting pitcher. The fact that, they were dealing with Yamamoto having this injury throughout the keeping him out for a couple weeks, May to September, I believe it was, that he was out in its entirety, and working himself back as the playoffs went on. He was impressive for them. Dealing with all the injuries that they did, Tyler Glasnow, Gavin Stone, even, of course, Shohei Ohtani, who didn't pitch all season long, but somebody that is going to be a factor in the pitching department as well next season once again. Just incredible, leaning on the bullpen and coming through with results. And I think that it's a testament to the players themselves, of course. You look at Trinan, Vesia, Kopech, Banda, all of them were magnificent for them in the playoffs. But Dave Roberts as well, knowing when to use those bullets. You talk about Game 2 against the Mets, where they just sort of sold early in that one, knew that they didn't want to roll out their A arms. That's what he did in Game 4 yesterday as well, and it came up huge for them, of course, considering the fact that Flaherty was not really available for them in Game 5, and the way that he was able to, roll all of them out, keeping Trinan in for those extra, I'd say extra inning, probably. Those 4 outs were one thing, but to throw him out again for the 8th inning and sticking with him when he did get into a jam with Judge and Chisholm on base, it was really incredible overall. So I think Dave Roberts deserves credit, and for whatever it's worth, nobody wants to hear the praise of the Dodgers ownership. It's not that hard. They just go and they spend money. But you know what? They're dedicated. They do their job well. Like, a lot of people are against these juggernauts acquiring all of the talent, and I totally understand. It feels unfair sometimes. But, ownership groups that actually invest are admirable, in my opinion. You look at all the moves that they've made over these past couple years, acquiring Mookie Betts, signing Freddie Freeman, signing Shohei Ohtani, the pitchers as well, Yamamoto, who, like we mentioned, had a role, at least definitely a pivotal role for the Dodgers to be able to come out of that Padres series, and ultimately the start that you got in Game 2 from him. And then moves like trading at the deadline for a Jack Flaherty and a Michael Kopech. I mean, I give them tons of props because I am a Red Sox fan, and the ownership group in Boston doesn't really seem to care enough to actually invest money into the team. So when you see other organizations actually spending money, if you're a fan of a small market team, I totally get you. But at the end of the day, again, there's a lot of bad owners out there across professional sports, and I think having a cheap owner is one of the worst things that can possibly be for a fan of a particular team, and the Dodgers are certainly not that. So, they did their job once again. They are the Dodgers. They understood the assignment, and they did what they had to do to bring home a World Series. So very impressive there. Then again, on the Yankees side of this, I mean, it's definitely disappointing to make it this far, to feel like you had a golden opportunity based off of how the American League shook out, having Judge and Soto, and now no longer knowing what the case is there. But I do think this is going to be looked back fondly from Yankees fans. I mean, just to be able to make it to a World Series once again, there has been a lot of very disappointing postseason runs for the Yankees, being on a, whatever it was, 15-year drought of making the World Series, that this one definitely stings, but I think there's really no shame in losing to this Dodgers team. They were a wagon. And as for the Yankees, I mean, we'll see how all of this plays out. Certainly, whether Juan Soto is back or not, this is going to be a team that looks differently. They're going to have to sell off some pieces in order to make room for Soto, very likely speaking. You have, Gleyber Torres as a free agent. I think Anthony Rizzo is a free agent as well. Garrett Cole has an opt-out in his contract, so ultimately we'll see there. But, a valiant effort. And again, it just feels like if that bottom of the lineup was able to produce more for them early on, could have been a different story. But let me know what your takeaways and thoughts are on this series and on this MLB season as a whole in the comment section. But we are now going to be switching gears to the NFL. We're going to be previewing tonight's Thursday Night Football matchup between the Houston Texans and the New York Jets. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the Thursday Night Football matchup that is set to take place tonight. The Houston Texans going on the road to face the New York Jets. Should be, you would think from a record perspective, that this game should be pretty straightforward, that the Texans are going to be able to beat up on the Jets coming off of the disappointing loss last week against the New England Patriots, but might be a little bit more interesting than that. You look at the line right now on ESPN Bet, the Jets, it appear, are 2.5 point favorites over the Texans, which again is really not what you would initially expect. But it is very important to take into consideration that the Texans are down Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. Collins has been on injured reserve. Stephon Diggs just suffered a torn ACL during, I think it was the second half of last week's game, in a winning effort over the Colts, and we saw CJ Stroud be able to do a good enough job of, spreading the ball out to different receivers. We saw some flashes from Tank Dell. We saw John Mechie. There was a nice connection between Stroud and Mechie there. But this is a very good secondary that the Texans are about to face in the Jets, and you have to wonder what that is going to look like. And I think that, as much as the passing game is going to be sort of the X factor there, the Texans do I believe, have a favorable matchup, you could say, in the rushing attack versus the Jets defense. Jets defense has been disappointing this year by most metrics that you could potentially look at. And the way that they have been able to be run on in some of these games is a huge concern. And meanwhile, you have in Houston, every game that Joe Mixon has played in, it has made a huge difference in terms of actually having these extra dimensions to their game. We saw this for a lot of the year last season, where the Texans were struggling to run the ball early on. Late in the year, we saw Devin Singletary be able to take his game up a notch, but it was sort of a missing piece with this Texans offense, and Joe Mixon has been excellent, rushing for over 100 yards per game in the 5 games that he has played in. And that includes the game that he went down as well against the Bears, where he was limited in that one to just 25 yards. So in all 4 of the games that he has been fully available for them, he has rushed for over 100 yards. And at least 1 touchdown in every single one of those games as well. So I do think that the Texans are going to be able to have success running the ball. What I will at least throw out there, not going to hit on it heavy, but a little bit of a subplot with this Texans team as well is the poor play from the offensive line, specifically at that left guard spot. The Texans have been really struggling to, find a solution. Coming into the year, it was Kenyon Green that was supposed to be the go-to guy for them, their first-round selection in 2022, and he has just been very poor up to this point in the season. He was benched last week against the Colts, and I think it was early second quarter, and Jarrett Patterson, basically his replacement, got hurt almost immediately. So it appears that Green is going to get the start tonight. Don't have official word on that, but there is, something to be concerned with against a Jets defense that, again, as much as they have been underwhelming, they do have good personnel. So how they will maybe attack that weakness in the offensive line should be pretty interesting to see, because I don't think that the Texans have a great interior offensive line. Now, on the Jets side of this as well, they are in total survival mode at this point. 2-6, coming off of a very disappointing loss against the Patriots, who probably won't win many more games going forward this season. This is the same Patriots team for the most part that the Jets were able to beat up on severely when they faced the Patriots in week 3. They won that game 24-3, and somehow it just looked so much worse for the Jets this past weekend visiting New England. And that was with the Patriots having to make a change at quarterback halfway through the game. Drake May getting hurt early on in this one. Jacoby Brissett coming in, playing mostly well for them, but still a very dysfunctional offense for the Patriots. Lots of drop passes. They could have actually won by a more significant margin against the Jets had they actually been a largely functioning team. Now, you can make similar comments and arguments as well on the other side of this as well. The Jets missing kicks, huge issue for them. It has been in 2 of the past 3 weeks against the Bills a few weeks ago and against the Patriots last week, that the Jets do probably, if you are an optimist, you're on this 5-game losing streak, but 2 of those games were really 3 of those games as well, if you want to extend it back to the Broncos loss as well. They could have a handful more games that are in the win column. 4 of their 5 losses coming in 1-score games. So as much as it feels hopeless for a lot of it, they've also been in every single one of these games, even with playing. They were terrible in the first half against the Vikings. In that game, they still had plenty of opportunities. It's just about the execution, really, and it's all eyes are on the offense, obviously, as they should be. I continue to think that, the Jets' offensive line actually isn't quite as bad as people make it out to be. It's kind of an easy excuse for a lot of people that are Rodgers defenders, but at a certain point, it comes down to him actually making the throws that he needs to. And the interceptions and the turnovers have been bad for him this point. I definitely don't want to make it out to sound like the Jets haven't been, Aaron Rodgers hasn't been hit these past few weeks, because I feel like it was really going back to that Broncos game at the beginning of this losing streak that Rodgers gets hit a good few times a game, and it looks like it hurts as for somebody that is 41 years old. But at the same time, they don't necessarily execute anything great offensively. The run game, now there has been some form of, I think, optimism, specifically with the Bills game and the Patriots game. Steelers won not quite as much, but we're at least seeing Breece Hall be felt a little bit more, I would argue. Ultimately, I don't think the Pittsburgh game was great for Breece Hall either. He had over 100 yards receiving, though. I think that some of the breakaway speed and such, and expecting him to sort of make the, elite plays, I just don't know if I really see it with them. But again, not trying to be a, pile on Breece Hall segment here either. But it's just across the board. The Jets have been underwhelming. But ultimately, I do feel like the fact that this game has a Jets favored by 2.5 there's definitely some real trap potential here. I would have to imagine, I can probably do a little bit of research on the fly here in terms of where the distribution of the public money is. I would probably venture to guess that it leans more heavily in favor of people laying the Texans in terms of public money. I mean, it's at 69% actually right now for the Texans, which isn't quite as lopsided as I was expecting. But, it feels like a situation where the Texans are going to be tested tonight, and specifically it's going to be CJ Stroud. Like I mentioned, there are some good players in that front seven on the Jets defense. For whatever reason it may be, they haven't necessarily been living up to expectations this season, but CJ Stroud is likely going to be under pressure on a number of instances, and he is going to be with backup receivers. And, what's he going to be able to do with a lessened version of a receiving core? I think that he is going to be okay to some degree, but, Tank Dell, Xavier Hutchinson, Robert Woods, John Mechie, they have some depth, but ultimately, I mean, I'm not betting on this game. If I were to, I would definitely be intrigued by that Jets line. Kind of makes me feel like they're not anticipating the Texans to be able to score. I don't think the Jets are going to be able to score either. The over-under here is, I believe, 42.5. That kind of feels like what my heaviest lean would be in this game. Again, if I were to have to make some picks here. But, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. I guess I'm going with the Texans to win this game on the road against the Jets because my confidence level in New York is just so low. But I'm telling you, if you are, that is I'd definitely be aware of where that line ends up because I think that it's a real indicator that something weird's about to happen tonight and the Jets are going to be able to win this one. But let me know what your thoughts are. We're going to be coming back with some actual more definitive picks later on in the show. But before we do so, we are going to be doing our weekly power rankings for the top 10 teams in the NFL entering Week 9. We have another change up in the top 3, a new team entering the top 10. So a whole lot to dive into. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are now going to be releasing this week's version of the NFL Power Rankings. Entering Week 9 here, we have a new team into the top 10. We have a shakeup in the top 3. So without further ado, just diving into this one. Number 10, I have the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles have been a team that have been tiptoeing in and out of the top 10 throughout the season. And I do feel like on paper, this is a team that I can get behind. And really what I've been, pleading the Eagles to do for weeks now is start to establish the run earlier in the game with Saquon Barkley. And that is what they were able to do. They scored on their opening drive, I believe, for the first time this entire season last week against the Bengals. And I think that a lot of that attributes to the fact that Saquon Barkley was heavily involved. Jalen Hurts is an excellent complimentary piece. And I'd say that in no means trying to tear him down. But I think that the reality of the situation is this Eagles team for years now has been built around the offensive line and the run game. And now you add behind that, yeah, sure, you have some losses on the O-line, specifically Jason Kelce. But Now you add debatably the best running back in the NFL behind you. You have to take advantage of that. So the Eagles, after what ended up being, I guess on paper, a dominant win against the Bengals, really it was them just pulling away in the third quarter, and that was because of their defense as well, against what is a very good passing offense. So pretty impressive performance last week, 3 in a row. Eagles are going to be in contention for the top of the NFC West. I have them coming in at number 10, NFC East, I should say, which is also where the Washington Commanders are at, or reside as well. And the Commanders won last week on the Hail Mary, of course. They really did control a lot of that game against the Bears, but There's a situation here where I think that they'll be fine. That was a very good defense that they played against the Bears. I've been calling them elite headed into the season, and they've been backing that up. The issue, I guess, I have with the Commanders is feels like they have, at times, a struggle to actually get in the end zone. That's maybe an unfair statement, mostly basing that off of the Week 2 game against the Giants and this past game against the Bears. Jaden Daniels banged up anyways, though, and that is part of the reason why they are as low as they are. They were on the upward trajectory just a couple weeks ago, and it's not that I think that they are a worse team. They are certainly in this area, in this caliber of team, and they have a great chance to win the NFC East. But Jaden Daniels, while he's banged up, I have to give them somewhat of a tick, but it's either way, it's not like I'm moving them down significantly because of it. I'm just hesitant to sort of vault them into top 5 territory, especially when I do have questions about the defense even still. Number 8, the San Francisco 49ers. So they move up 1 spot over the Commanders this past week. And it was a weird game this past weekend, Sunday Night Football. It was a very close game, basically outside of that dominant 49ers third quarter where they scored 21-0. They outscored the Cowboys, and that was basically the lead that they built up and were just able to hang on to. I still have questions with, the operation of the team right now as they navigate through some of these injuries, but I talked about it earlier this week. One of the biggest developments I have seen with this 49ers team is they just continue to incorporate some of their young talent into meaningful roles. You look up and down their first, I'd call it 3-4 rounds of the draft, and they have found contributors. Now, Ricky Pearsall, not quite yet a part of that group. He did have, a solid performance when he was actually, counted upon to be in the offense following Ayuk's injury last week. That Pearsall, I believe, can be a real factor in this offense. You have an 8-game starter now in Dominic Pooney on the front line for them. You have the defensive contributions of Renardo Green, who was one of the highest rated cornerbacks in the NFL this past weekend in terms of Pro Football Focus. Malik Mustafa making a handful of big plays as well. He's been having a significant season. So the 49ers, I just continue to have trust in them. I think they're extremely well coached, well run as an organization, and I have a hard time really docking them a ton here. So I have them at 8 right now, entering week 9. Number 7, I have the Houston Texans, and I feel bad for continuing to exclude the Texans from that top 5. Injuries are the reason, though. It's not that I don't have a belief in C.J. Stroud, D'Amico Ryans, and I really do like their roster as a whole, but they are yet to be fully healthy on offense. Joe Mixon got injured in week 2, missed a handful of weeks. Nico Collins is now on the IR for them. And Stephon Diggs tearing his ACL this past weekend, I think is just kind of goes to show how depleted they are right now. Now, I still do like the Texans as a team as a whole. Again, I feel almost disrespectful because I haven't been able to get them into that top 5 just yet. I'm waiting for them to be healthy, and when they are, I think that we can see them be one of the top contenders in the NFL, but truthfully, I have a hard time doing that when there are so many question marks in terms of their weapons and the health status of them up to this point in the season. So I have the Texans at number 7. I think they're also on technical upset watch, even though they are underdogs tonight against the Jets. Number 6, I have the Minnesota Vikings. Vikings lose 2 straight games, definitely disappointing to some degree. I mean, they had been playing with house money coming into, the past couple weeks after starting 5-0, but we're starting to see maybe some of the limitations with this Vikings team. The defense specifically, and that secondary, I do think can be thrown on. It's very schematic dependent based off of Brian Flores and the pressure that he's able to generate up front. It doesn't mean that they're a bad defense whatsoever, but I think personnel-wise, we understand they're not exactly an elite talent on the defense. They have a lot of individual elite talents. I'm not necessarily fully sold in, though, on the collection of everybody they have. So that's one thing. The Vikings might be lower on this list if it weren't for the fact that they were able to replace Christian Darrisaw after Darrisaw went down with it was a knee injury. I don't know what the official prognosis was, but losing Darrisaw absolutely hurts them. Cam Robinson is at least a good enough, fill-in starter for him. He's not excellent. He's not elite by any means, but he is good enough that he's going to be able to step in for the Vikings and make an impact. But I do have the Vikings outside of my top 5 for the first time this year. They come in at number 6. Number 5, I have the Buffalo Bills. The Bills have been playing excellent football these past couple of weeks, and I do think that, they're starting to really come back into form. The defense continues to be excellent for them. The offense, now, we haven't necessarily seen Amari Cooper have a big-time impact on the field just yet, but I do feel like it's coming, and just him being an option for them is huge because you add to Cooper as well. I mean, Khalil Shakir is an excellent supplementary wide receiver as well, a number 2, a slot guy for them. It's just a matter of, if he is your primary target, that isn't a great situation as a whole, at least in 2024. I'm not trying to, mark a cap on what he can be as he continues to progress with Josh Allen, but, he's a nice piece for them. Keon Coleman has continued to develop throughout the course of the season. So you're talking about a win margin of something like 45 over the past couple games. Yeah, the Bills are back in the top 5 in my eyes. Number 4, I have the Baltimore Ravens, who lost this past weekend against the Cleveland Browns. Definitely a disappointing loss. We went into it specifically yesterday about how I actually think the Browns are an all-right team now in this version of themselves with Jameis Winston at quarterback as they continue to get offensive linemen back, Nick Chubb back, and the defense is, at least this past week, looked really good, was able to take advantage, though, of what is a weaker Ravens offensive line. And that's not to say that they can't continue to get better throughout the course of the season. 3 new starters on that O-line, but that's an issue for them. And the passing defense is also massively concerning. So, knock the Ravens a couple of spots here, but I do think that was also just a very impressive performance from the Browns. Ravens have a ways to go in terms of being true contenders and competitors to the Chiefs, but they're definitely in that conversation. Number 3, I have the Green Bay Packers. Packers were number 2 last week. I have them dropping 1 spot, and really it's just because of the injury to Jordan Love. It's a risky spot here where, Love, it seems like, and there was just a report from Ian Rappaport earlier this afternoon that it is the Packers are at least optimistic about him playing this upcoming weekend against the Lions. We'll see about that. I think the Packers have a great chance, and this should be an excellent game. I do have the Packers at number 3 because I have the Lions taking 1 spot in front of them, these two switching based off of, I do worry about the Lions and their defense now that Aiden Hutchinson is hurt. Last week, you look at the dominant fashion that they were able to win. I mean, the Titans still did drive on the Lions for a lot of this game. So it's something where I'm not over the moon right now about the Lions. I still kind of feel like in the back of my head, the Packers are the better team, but based off of, power rankings of where we are currently at with Jordan Love dealing with this groin injury, probably going to be hindered. The Lions have been blowing teams out these past couple weeks. It's really a toss-up to me. I do have the Lions at number 2. And then number 1, I have the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, one of those situations. As long as they keep winning, and barring any sort of significant injury to them, I am going to continue to say that they're the best team in the league. I understand it hasn't looked the prettiest thing, up to this point, but they're getting results, and they're doing so with a Patrick Mahomes that is struggling right now. And I don't think that they really have reinforcements coming in terms of on the offensive side of the ball. That does worry me some. This Chiefs team is built around the defense. It's just, that's what we all need to get around our head, and their defense is elite at this point. So I think that they have ultimately, again, I know he's not playing like it. I'm not saying he's having the best season, but Patrick Mahomes, in my opinion, is the best quarterback in the NFL. I would take him over any other quarterback for a playoff game, a do-or-die game that were to be played tomorrow. And, the defense with Spagnuolo has been absolutely elite as well. So, Chiefs are still a wagon. There's a reason they're undefeated. I understand all of the other sort of nonsense that goes on about it, the refs, Mahomes, interceptions, all of that. But I'm rocking with the Chiefs until they force my hand and tell me that they are not the number 1 team in the NFL. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Who is your number 1 team? Let me know what I got right, what I got wrong. But we are now going to be diving into our final segment of the day, where we are going to be handing out my top 5 best bets for Week 9 in the NFL. So we will be diving into that. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, as we are going to be handing out my top 5 best bets for NFL Week 9. A little bit sketchy doing this on a Thursday afternoon. Obviously, a lot of injury updates to come, so take this with a grain of salt here. But I think that we got some winners ultimately for Week 9. Up to this point in the season, we are 25-14-1, coming off of another winning week last weekend. So without further ado, diving into it here. First game I have here, the New England Patriots versus the Tennessee Titans. The Patriots coming off of a win last week against the Jets. The Titans in a blowout loss against the Lions. This line is 3.5 points in favor of Tennessee. And this is a game where I think, for the most part, I think most people understand that both of these teams are among the worst in the NFL. So for either one of them to be favored over the other by 3.5 points is, a little bit surprising to me. That being said, though, I kind of think the line is exactly right, where the Titans, as much as they lost by, I believe it was something like 40 points last week against the Lions, that they were actually able to move the ball with Mason Rudolph at quarterback, assuming that he is going to be starting once again. I think that they can have at least enough success against a Patriots defense that is largely uninspiring. They have certain players on that team. I'm a Patriots fan myself. Christian Gonzalez, huge believer in him. The rest of the injuries, though, that have occurred across the defense, I think it's very concerning, and I think that the Titans actually, now with Mason Rudolph, are going to be better led, and more than anything, offensively. Like, I think the Titans are going to be able to move the ball enough to at least score points. I don't have that same confidence in the Patriots, where the Titans are actually one of the best defenses in the NFL in terms of some of the basic stats. Number one team in defensive yards allowed per game. Number one in passing defense. Still in the top 50% of rushing defense as well. So they have talent on that defensive side of the ball. And the Patriots, on the other hand, I just don't think that they have that same level of physicality to be able to, match up with the Titans here. I think that the Titans are going to win this game and probably do so by enough points to cover this game. So I am going to go with Tennessee minus 3.5 against New England. Next up, Colts playing against the Vikings. This is the Colts' first game, since the benching, at least, of Anthony Richardson. Joe Flacco now under center. And I think that the Colts are just getting too many points in this instance. We bet with them last week as well to cover +5 against the Texans. They got us there, and that was even with Anthony Richardson, at the end of the first half and really throughout the game, frankly, doing his best job decision-making wise to make that impossible. But the Colts defense was terrific. Specifically, that front seven was incredible for them. And they have one of the best running backs in the league in Jonathan Taylor. And I think that that's something that is going to be able to have success once again this upcoming week. Joe Flacco is savvy enough that I think he's going to be able to recognize a lot of the blitzes that Brian Flores is going to throw at them. The Colts have a good offensive line to hold up. And again, this is just too many points. I think the Vikings still win this game, but I think that the Colts have I think that they cover. They keep this one close. +5, too many. We're rocking with the Colts once again. Washington Commanders against the New York Giants. I don't love this spread necessarily. Divisional matchups, specifically in the NFC East, these always seem to go down to the wire. And I am going to lean with the Commanders here. I think that ultimately the Commanders are a better team. Not that it's totally fair to do it this way, but you look at, the Giants were able to hang around last week against the Steelers because the Steelers don't necessarily still have the offense to be able to sort of close games out convincingly. I'm a little bit worried about Jaden Daniels as he continues to deal with this rib injury, but honestly, I still think that the Giants are going to, I don't think that the Giants are going to be able to put up enough points. And Washington's defense certainly isn't elite by any means, but I do think that they have done a very good job, specifically against mobile quarterbacks this season. The discipline that Dan Quinn has instilled in this Commanders team to be able to contain and everything. I think that that front seven is talented. Daniel Jones isn't going to be able to really pose enough of a downfield threat to make things interesting for the Commanders here. I think that the Commanders, I'm laying the points with them, -4. Lions against the Packers, probably the marquee matchup of this upcoming weekend. The Lions are going to Green Bay to face a Packers team that it's still up in the air as to whether or not Jordan Love is going to play in this game. It sounds like the Packers are optimistic about his chances to play this upcoming weekend. That's kind of the mindset I'm operating under. And I think that last week's, it's sort of similar to what happened with that Titans game and that line. I think that the final score isn't totally indicative of how that game actually played out. The Lions were outgained significantly in that one. Jared Goff, only threw for something like 85 yards in that game. And it was because it was also all that they needed of him. But I've been a believer in the Packers all year. I did just have the Lions ahead of the Packers in my power rankings. Had to give the Lions the slight edge based off of the results of some of these games that they've been playing. But ultimately, I think the Packers at home are going to be able to make things interesting. I feel like there's a good chance that this could be the first game that we really feel the absence of Aiden Hutchinson, where outside of that, what type of pressure are the Lions going to be able to put on Jordan Love, forcing him into bad decisions? I'm not really sure. So I would probably recommend buying that half point from the Packers. Now, this is also dependent on whether or not Jordan Love is healthy for them, but I think that he's going to play. I think that, again, this is a game that is going to be very close. Ultimately, again, I'd probably recommend buying that half point for the Packers. Do with that what you will, but I think that they can cover in the range of a field goal. I am taking them plus 2.5. Final game here, another divisional opponent, or divisional matchup, Rams versus the Seahawks. This game in Seattle, and this one feels like it might be a little bit of a reach, but at the end of the day, I just think that the Rams are the better team. I think that they can capitalize on some of the deficiencies with Seattle, the fact that they've been one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL this season. We've seen what the Rams, specifically last week, especially once Christian Darrisaw went down, when there are gaps in opposing offensive lines, the Rams can feast a little bit. They have young playmakers on that front line and in the secondary as well, that I think this is probably a game that is inching towards the over side. I am curious what the line is there. Not that we're picking over-unders. We never do on this show. 48.5 actually is a lot of points. So, Vegas feels the same way, that points are going to be scored in this game, but, it kind of makes me think that, 48.5 is a lot of points is all. But again, we're not getting into that right now. But the Rams, I think that they have, just overall, they do have the better roster. I think that Mike McDonald and what he's been able to do with this defense when fully healthy is very notable. And I think that the Seahawks are a fine team, but when they go up against real competition, we saw sort of what took place last week against the Bills. I don't really consider the Falcons to be competition, to be honest with you. And then the 49ers game as well, Seahawks beat fairly handedly in that one as well. So taking the Rams, I don't love this one, but ultimately, I'm going with Stafford and McVay against what is a young team with young coaching. And I think that McVay probably, from a schematic standpoint, is going to... I have confidence in him that he can win that matchup against McDonald and the defense. But just as a review here, Rams minus 1.5, Packers plus 2.5, Commanders minus 4, the Colts plus 5, and we have the, Titans minus 3.5. Now, I'll address here a comment from Anthony Manzano, who says, I don't think Indianapolis covers. I think they get blown out by 10 points, 10 or more points. I don't know if I see it that same way. I think that Joe Flacco is good enough to be able to pick up on the over-aggressive nature of that Vikings defense, that it's a good offense around him, from the receivers and the running back and the offensive line. It's really just about finding that answer at QB, and Anthony Richardson, unfortunately, just wasn't really NFL ready enough to the point where, he led them to a fine record. I believe they went something like 2-2 in his starts, something like that, or 3-3. But ultimately, I don't think that Richardson was the answer. Flacco is going to be able to come in and, again, I'm not defending the decision necessarily to start him. It sounds like there's some tension in the locker room as a result of it. They're a better football team with him in it. They were able to hang in that game against the Texans last week. I think that they are going to be able to do so once again against the Vikings this upcoming week. But that is... we have one other comment here from Anthony. It says, honestly, with Tua back, I think my team is done. Anthony, regular on the program here. He is a Dolphins fan. Said, With Tua back, I think my team is done. We don't beat Buffalo, and I think we lose the rest of our games because he has proven with his track record the past few seasons that he will not show up when we need him the most. I also think that the Dolphins season is, mostly over, frankly, and it's tough because things could have potentially played out differently if Tua was healthy. I wouldn't have guaranteed that either. We saw early on in the year that the offense wasn't exactly, looking at its best. Now we're talking about 2 weeks into the season, obviously. A lot of units not looking at their best at that point. But I don't know. I mean, for the Dolphins, I think it's extremely hard to ask them to be able to overcome everything. What I would say is that the AFC playoff picture is pretty open in that wild card spot. So if the Dolphins can start to string together some wins, they will be in the mix of things. But currently 2-5, I wouldn't have a ton of faith either necessarily in them being able to turn this around. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We've been doing this for the past 9 months. This is my final show here with the GSMC Sports Network. So again, thank you very much to all of those involved who allowed me this opportunity to host the show. It will be continuing on with Nelson Jimenez, the host of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Not quite sure when it's getting exactly started back up. But that is it for me here at the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you to all who contributed with your comments throughout the show. But the show will be back at some point soon. As for me, though, that is all. Have a great day and take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.